I've always romanticized Hollywood. As an aspiring filmmaker, the prospect of not only earning a living as a writer-director, but also having the privilege to contribute my perspective on the human condition was and still is my life ambition. To me, filmmaking in the veins of auteurs like Kubrick or Scorsese is the epitome of the American dream. Words cannot describe how I feel when I experience a masterpiece like 2001 or Shutter Island, and I can only hope to create something with a fraction of their impact. But for now, I want to focus on my romanticizing of the industry. See, it's easy to get caught up in the glamour and ignore the flaws of Hollywood. I still view the film industry as the American dream, my American dream, or at least I think I still do. There's no doubt I've been seeing it through rose-colored glasses. And in light of recent events, I can no longer ignore the facets of Hollywood that aren't so pretty. Perhaps Shakespeare said it best in The Merchant of Venice. All that glisters is not gold. Often have you heard that told. Many a man his life hath sold, but my outside to behold. Despite all that, I think a unifying aspect filmmakers such as myself share is the drive to find a voice, cultivate it, and share it with the world. In that way, we may connect with other people across time and space, so that even after death, our words and images may live on. Life is hard. That isn't a groundbreaking revelation, but so many ignore the existential struggles of the human experience. They accept the status quo and become cynical, hedonistic, or opportunistic. I've always found that troubling. I couldn't understand how, when at best most of us only have 80 years to live, one could just play it safe and peripheralize the arts. Majority certainly consume them as a means of entertainment, but only a minority analyze critically, and even fewer desire to strive to make their own unique contribution. On top of that, a number of those same individuals then belittle aspiring artists for putting themselves out there. These cynics mock and even bully novice talent, all for attempting to create something bigger than themselves. I don't think I'm alone in this. Many aspiring artists are consistently put down, and that seems emblematic of life itself. So many actors and musicians have spoken out during acceptance speeches about being bullied for pursuing their dreams that it's become a cliche.
Were you bullied as a kid?
Yeah, I got slurs all the time because I was in music and art.
It's certainly easy to roll our eyes at them, but despite its repetitiveness, there is some validity to what they're claiming. I mean, just peruse through YouTube comments on a modest short film, and I think the prevalence of this issue will become abundantly clear. So it isn't surprising that Hollywood became a mecca for me, the promised land, a place where I could collaborate with like-minded people, create original works of art that could withstand the test of time. A platform where I, like so many before me, could inspire others, but also, and admittedly less admirable, success in the industry would show the haters that my thoughts were worth something, that just because I wanted more for my efforts than a 4-year degree and a 9-to-5 didn't make me any less valuable to society. I had a vision, and even though it sounds trite, I could still change the world, and Hollywood was my ticket to self-actualization. My conception of Hollywood was that it was full of artists like me, people who were once victimized for being different, people who sacrificed everything to have their voices heard, people who were determined and would stop at nothing to pursue such a noble endeavor. But they are still just people after all. You're probably wondering what all this has to do with recent bombshells of alleged abuse at the hands of prominent Hollywood figures. From my perspective, these revelations were a bombshell indeed, but perhaps for more reasons than others realized. Before I continue, I want to make it clear that any abusive behavior, whether it's misconduct, assault, rape, or otherwise, is unacceptable, and those actions should be eradicated from all corners of our society. Any pain that I'm feeling as a result of these revelations pale in comparison to the pain of the victims of this abuse, that with each passing day appears to be systemic. The number one priority must be justice for the victims, and a cultural shift that precludes such behavior to subsist. Now, at first, it was easy to distance my notion of Hollywood from this scandal. Studio executive Harvey Weinstein, the first major domino to fall, is, by all accounts, not an artist. If anything, he's the portion of Hollywood to which I felt no connection. The moneybags, the muscle, the necessary evil that allows films to exist on such a grand scale in a capitalistic society. So while I was disgusted by his alleged behavior, the story didn't resonate with me. More and more accusations emerged, and it was starting to chip away at the romanticized vision I projected. Notable directors and actors such as Brett Ratner and Kevin Spacey were being accused of sexual harassment or worse. Still though, none of it really hit home yet. But all that changed when the New York Times followed up their piece on Weinstein with credible accusations of sexual misconduct committed by comedian Louis C.K. Now this was a bombshell to me. To a casual observer who's just heard sound bites from C.K.'s stand-up, these allegations may not be all that surprising. His material famously had no limits, perhaps to a fault. But Louis C.K. was so much more than a comedian, at least to me anyway. He was an auteur. While there's no doubt his vulgarity was excessive, his insight into the human condition was so poignant. His FX series Louis explored existential crises of growing up, falling in love, heartbreak, divorce, single parenthood, and death.
Look, I liked the feeling of being in love with her. I liked it. But now she's gone and I miss her and it sucks. And I didn't think it was gonna be this bad. And I feel like why even be happy if it's just gonna lead to this? You know, it wasn't worth it.
There are the closing doors, please.
Jane! Jane! Jane,
okay,
stop
Daddy.
the train! Open the door!
Hey, Daddy, I'm gonna stay right here.
Jane!
I'll stay right here.
Jane!
It's my dream.
Jane!
I'll stay right here.
He offered a unique perspective on what it means to be human, and he did so without being pretentious, simplistic, or pedantic. When I would watch bits that could have been red flags about his behavior, I interpreted them as hyperbolic satire. I believe he exaggerated the negative qualities of individuals or groups of people to humorous effect in order to shed light on a clear societal problem. I still believe that was his genuine cognitive intention, even if his subconscious had another agenda. Take, for instance, when CK talks about women dating men in this bit.
How do women still go out with guys when you consider the fact that there is no greater threat to women than men? We're the #1 threat to women. Globally and historically, we're the #1 cause of injury and mayhem to women. We're the worst thing that ever happens to them. That's true. You know what our #1 threat is? Heart disease. That's the whole thing.
Clearly, the likelihood of one going on a date with a potential murderer is absurd, but it's likely enough to evoke laughter from the audience. This bit serves as a reminder of the struggles I'm privileged not to worry about, or at least to a lesser degree, because of my status as a straight man. The Nerdwriter is a fantastic and thoughtful video critiquing Louis C.K. as a moral detective. Link in the description. His analysis perfectly encapsulates my views on the nature of C.K.'s work, and if you haven't seen it, I would implore you to watch it. While C.K. constantly pushed the envelope, behind it all seemed to be a genuine and thoughtful perspective from a normal guy who continued to grow as a person with each special and episode he worked tirelessly to create. Obviously, the esteem I once held for Louis C.K. will forever be tainted by the admitted sexual misconduct that he committed on more than one occasion. While I do think it's essential to differentiate misconduct, assault, and rape as not one and the same, I don't want to detract from the central focus here. Likewise, it's worth noting that the growing lack of regard for due process and the witch hunt culture that has ensued, largely influenced by online media, is disconcerting. All of that still comes secondary to the victimization of people by powerful men and women. Those topics are worth discussing in another video, but for now, I want to set it aside and speak directly to admitted, substantiated, and convicted crimes of a sexual nature. So we're at a crossroads. Where do we go from here? What impact will this inevitably have on Hollywood and society at large? Although these questions have no simple answers, one fact is clear. We cannot let this blow over and allow people in power to prey on susceptible victims. Culture and societal attitudes must change. Unfortunately, with every noble crusade, collateral damage is inevitable. Part of me really wanted to avoid addressing this, but I think it's imperative to consider right now while we propose concrete changes to the system in solving this problem. Forgive me, this will take a moment to properly explain, but I promise it'll connect. You see, there's one aspect to being an aspiring, independent filmmaker that is by far the most trying for me. It's a constant source of anxiety, my biggest fear. It's the question I hate asking myself before I embark on any film project, but nonetheless ask every single time. How will this film be perceived and impact me personally? I don't mean how will it be perceived by the artistic community. I don't mean how will my family or friends respond. I don't even mean how will the potential negative reaction impact my ego. I'm talking about employers, coworkers, HR reps, students, parents, future employers, people who may take one of my films, a specific scene, particular character, or even just a line of dialogue at face value as opposed to interpreting a deeper meaning. I worry about those with power over me being more concerned about the outward perceptions than the endeavor of creating something meaningful and authentic. I'm terrified that they may take my film or an aspect out of context, make a superficial judgment, and then deem it not representative of their institution. Fired.
Read my
facts! No! Please, no, I cannot be fired! I'm fired!
You're probably thinking my concerns sound shallow. Shallow that I'd let a fear like that stifle my creativity. Shallow that I'd be willing to sacrifice my vision for a job. You might also think that my concerns sound cynical, presumptuous, and pretentious. All supported by the notion that I assume my superiors would minimize a work of art and prioritize a PR move. You'd be right about all that. I too am human. Still, the First Amendment guarantees our freedom of speech, but when our very means of survival is threatened, isn't that really a facade? But then, off in the distance, there was Hollywood, the city on the hill, the one place where an artist had the freedom to pursue his vision without the superficial constraints imposed on most of us. However, with the fallout of this crisis looming, I fear that the freedoms of artistic expression will be lost even in Hollywood. By lost, I mean that innocent artists may be associated with perpetrators, merely based on the interpretation of something as minimal as a line of dialogue. Studios, agents, networks, etc. rightfully drop substantiated perpetrators. But what's to stop them from dropping, effectively silencing other artists in the future over unsubstantiated accusations or misinterpretations? There's no easy solution to this predicament. As I mentioned before, things must change. But I do fear the collateral damage, and I implore everyone to avoid a groupthink mentality, judge each instance on a case-by-case basis, and not make any rash decisions. We can fix this endemic problem and preserve artistic freedoms simultaneously. Those goals don't have to be mutually exclusive, but doing so will require us to demand both without compromise. Demand an end to sexism and misogyny within the industry. Demand an end to assault, misconduct, and rape. Demand perpetrators be held accountable for their actions through the court of law. And then, at the same time, condemn those who wrongfully associate innocent filmmakers and their works with aforementioned evil acts. Demand the preservation of artistic freedoms in the films that we create. If the freedom for a director to develop her own voice isn't guaranteed in the professional film industry, how can we possibly expect our freedoms of expression to be preserved outside of Hollywood? I am disturbed by both the prominence of this misconduct and its possible implications on the future of films. But more than that, I feel betrayed. I feel betrayed by many people I once looked up to. Not only personally, but also betrayed on behalf of the entire filmmaking community. Betrayed that what I believed was a supportive community that lifted people from disparity could instead take advantage of the admiration of other artists and prey on them, using status and clout as leverage. Artists are supposed to be the voice for the voiceless. These perpetrators attempted to silence aspiring and accomplished artists, and not only silence their right to speak against the unacceptable treatment they received, but also silence their unique artistic voice. These violators dehumanized vulnerable people and belittled their autonomy. The right each one of their victims had to cultivate his or her voice was hindered, perhaps irreversibly, from the blatant abuse. I can no longer entertain my fantasy about Hollywood, but that's okay. It was naive and ignorant. I was captivated by its shiny exterior and blind to its depraved inner workings, just as many of Portia's suitors were to the gold casket. The seeming truth with cunning times put on to entrap the wisest. Despite all this, I still have hope. If we don't fix this crisis in the film industry, Hollywood will be nothing more than the enticing gold casket. While the outside may glimmer, The inside remains vapid and lacks substance beyond its superficial exterior. Change occurs when the people demand it, so we must now act as Bassanio, once a shallow fool changed by love, and instead opt for the lead box. Between man and man, but thou meager lead, which rather threatens than dost promise aught. Thy paleness moves me more than eloquence, and here choose I, joy be the consequence.